I thought I was living my happy and faithful family life, but one message on social media ruined everything. She wants to take my daughter away from me. I'd always thought my life was the kind people dreamed of. At 26, I had a growing career as a fitness influencer, a beautiful wife, Rebecca, who, at 33, exuded confidence and charm, and a cozy suburban home. Rebecca was a business manager, always juggling meetings and projects with effortless grace. We had no kids yet, but we planned to start thinking about it soon, as she liked to say. From the outside, we looked perfect. But lately, something felt off. Rebecca had been distant, not overtly cold, but preoccupied. It was subtle at first, missed dinners, distracted replies, and those occasional, inexplicable late nights at the office. When I asked about it, she'd shrug and say, "You know how work is," flashing me the same disarming smile that melted my worries for years. One evening, while she was in the shower, I received a message from a follower on Instagram. It was a random guy whose profile screamed, "conspiracy theorist," so I wasn't sure what to make of it. The message was short and strange: "Check your wife's Facebook. You might want to see who she's been messaging." I almost ignored it, chalking it up to the usual nonsense that comes with social media fame. But curiosity gnawed at me. I opened Rebecca's Facebook account on her laptop. Our shared password made it easy. She rarely used it, but there it was, under her Messenger tab, a name I didn't recognize: Ethan. The messages were archived, buried deep, but the tone was unmistakable. Phrases like, "last night was perfect," and, "you make me feel alive," jumped out at me, each word tightening the knot in my stomach. My heart pounded as I scrolled up, piecing together their exchanges. Their affair wasn't just physical, it was emotional. And it had been going on for months. I slammed the laptop shut just as Rebecca's footsteps approached. My face must have betrayed me because she tilted her head, concerned. "Everything okay?" she asked, toweling her hair. "Yeah," I muttered, forcing a smile. "Just checking emails." But inside, my world was already beginning to crumble. Little did I know, this discovery was just the beginning. There was so much more to unravel, and I wasn't ready for any of it. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the messages, about the way Rebecca seemed to float around me, oblivious to the storm brewing inside my chest. I wanted to confront her, demand answers, but something held me back. I knew if I did, I might lose everything in an instant. We'd been married for 5 years, and I still remembered the day we met like it was yesterday, the way she laughed at my dumb joke, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at me. But those memories felt so distant now. Everything had changed. The trust was shattered. The person I thought I knew, the person I thought I could depend on, wasn't who I thought she was. I tried to carry on as normal, posting on social media, working out, staying in shape, but I couldn't focus. My thoughts were consumed with Rebecca and Ethan. I couldn't get rid of the images in my mind. Each time I saw Rebecca, I wondered, how long had this been going on? How many more secrets was she hiding from me? Then, the bombshell came. I had been doing a quick check on my email when something strange appeared in my inbox, a forwarded message from Rebecca's work email. The subject line simply read, "Meet Ethan tonight." I clicked it before I could even think to stop myself. My stomach dropped. The message wasn't from Rebecca to me, but it was from Ethan to her. The date was set for that night. He wanted to meet her at a local bar, somewhere quiet, away from prying eyes. My blood ran cold. I couldn't breathe. I needed to act fast. I looked at the clock. She'd be getting home in a few hours. Should I confront her now? Or should I wait and catch her in the act? The thought of waiting, of letting her think everything was fine, made me feel sick to my stomach. But what could I do? I couldn't just accuse her without proof. And so, I made a decision, one I'd regret, and one that would change everything. I grabbed my phone and texted a friend of mine, Steve, who worked as a private investigator on the side. He knew I was going through a rough patch, and though I had never imagined I'd need his help in this way, I had no choice now. I asked him to follow Rebecca tonight, to get the proof I needed. He agreed right away, sensing the urgency in my message. As I waited for Steve's updates, my anxiety skyrocketed. What if Rebecca found out I was watching her? What if she was too careful, too slick, and I would never catch her? I paced around the apartment, trying to hold it together, but the truth clawed at me from every angle. And then, the message came. "She's meeting him at 8 o'clock, Steve texted. Got her tailing him right now." My heart dropped. My hands shook as I sat down, trying to steady myself. This was it. I was about to face the truth, whether I was ready for it or not. What would I do if I saw them together? What would I say? What if I lost everything in a single moment? The clock ticked louder in my mind, each second feeling like an eternity. I had no idea how much longer I could hold it together before everything fell apart. At 7:30, Steve sent me another text. "She's here. Pulled up 10 minutes ago. Black dress. Alone so far, but she keeps checking her phone." My stomach churned. Rebecca always wore black when she wanted to feel confident, her power color, she called it. That detail stung more than I expected. I glanced at myself in the mirror, barely recognizing the person staring back. My reflection was pale, my eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. I hadn't eaten all day, and my nerves were fried. The clock read 7:45. I grabbed my keys, barely able to think. It felt like my body was moving on autopilot. The drive to the bar was a blur, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My heart pounded as I parked across the street, taking a deep breath before stepping out of the car. The bar was dimly lit, the kind of place we'd been to 100 times before. A cozy spot for dates and casual drinks, nothing flashy, nothing too obvious. My mind replayed the last time Rebecca and I had come here together. She'd laughed at one of my dumb jokes, her hand resting on mine, her face glowing in the candlelight. It was hard to reconcile that memory with the reality I was about to face. Steve texted again. "He's here. Just sat down with her. They're in a booth, left side. I'm near the back if you need me." I froze in the doorway, scanning the room. My chest tightened when I spotted them. Rebecca sat across from a man who looked about her age, maybe a little older. He was well-dressed, his posture confident, leaning slightly toward her. She was smiling, no, glowing, in a way I hadn't seen in years. My stomach twisted. I stayed near the entrance, hiding behind a group of people as I watched them. Rebecca laughed, leaning closer to him. He reached across the table, brushing her hand with his fingers. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I stepped forward, my legs trembling but resolute. My world felt like it was crashing down with every step. Rebecca looked up just as I reached the edge of their booth. Her eyes widened in shock, her smile vanishing instantly. "Liam." Her voice was barely a whisper, her face pale. Ethan glanced at me, confused but calm. "Who's this?" he asked, his tone casual. "That's a great question," I snapped, my voice shaking with anger. "Why don't you tell him, Rebecca?" "Who am I?" Rebecca's eyes darted between us, panic flooding her face. Ethan shifted in his seat, starting to look uncomfortable. "This isn't what it looks like," she stammered. "Isn't it?" I shot back. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're on a date with someone who isn't your husband." Ethan raised his hands defensively, clearly realizing the situation was escalating. "I think I should go," he muttered, starting to slide out of the booth. "Oh, don't leave on my account," I said coldly. "You're part of this too, aren't you?" Rebecca grabbed my arm, her voice pleading. "Liam, please. Let's talk about this somewhere else." I shook her off, glaring at her. We'll talk when I say we'll talk. Right now, I want to know how long this has been going on. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The silence was deafening, and the truth hung heavy in the air. Then Ethan said something that made my blood run cold. I didn't know she was married, he muttered, his eyes narrowing at Rebecca. My head snapped toward him. What? He stood up, his expression hardening. She told me she was divorced. Rebecca's face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. Liam, But I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. Not there. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the bar, the weight of everything crushing me as I stepped into the cold night air. I didn't know how I made it home. My hands trembled as I clutched the steering wheel, the scene from the bar replaying in my mind like a bad movie. Ethan's words echoed louder than Rebecca's tears. She told me she was divorced. It was one thing to lie to me, but to spin an entirely separate narrative to someone else. When I pulled into the driveway, the house felt foreign, like someone else lived there. I couldn't bring myself to go inside, so I sat in the car, staring at the dark windows. My phone buzzed. It was Steve. You okay? Saw what happened. I ignored it. The last thing I needed was pity. I needed answers. I needed clarity. But most of all, I needed to know how far this betrayal went. That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions, each one more haunting than the last. Was Ethan the only one? Or was there more to Rebecca's double life? My gut told me there was. The way she had panicked, the tears, the guilt, it was too much for one affair. The next morning, I decided to act. Rebecca wasn't home, she'd left a note saying she'd gone to a friend's to give me space. I didn't believe her for a second. I called Steve, asking him to dig deeper. I want everything, I said. Not just Ethan. I need to know if there's anyone else. Steve didn't disappoint. By the end of the day, he called me with an update that made my blood run cold. Liam, you're not going to like this, he started. Rebecca's been meeting not just Ethan, but 2 other guys, regularly. They all seem to know about each other. What are you saying? I asked, my voice shaking. She's been, hosting get-togethers. With all of them. Together, Steve said cautiously, like he was afraid the words might break me. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Where? Sometimes at hotels. Sometimes at one of their places. One guy, Chris, has a beach house. She was there last month with all of them. I felt like the air had been sucked out of my lungs. This wasn't just a simple affair, it was an entire network of betrayal. And the worst part? She had orchestrated it all. Steve sent me photos, videos, even screenshots of messages. Rebecca's web of lies stretched far deeper than I had imagined. There were group chats with all 3 men, Ethan, Chris, and another man named David. They joked about their arrangement, about Rebecca being their girl, and even made plans to meet again soon. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the evidence. In one video, Rebecca laughed as the 3 of them toasted her at dinner, their glasses clinking in unison. In another, they lounged together on a beach, Rebecca in the center, her arms draped around 2 of them like it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't process it. The woman I had married, the woman I thought I knew better than anyone, was leading a double life, a life where I didn't exist. That evening, Rebecca came home. She looked tired, her face drawn, but she managed a weak smile. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I stared at her for a long moment before speaking. "How many are there?" Her face crumpled instantly. "Liam, please. Don't, Liam, please, me," I snapped, my voice rising. "How many?" "Ethan, Chris, David, who else?" Her eyes widened in shock. How do you? It doesn't matter how I know, I said coldly. What matters is that I do. So tell me the truth, Rebecca. How long has this been going on? Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. A year, she whispered. Maybe longer. A year? I repeated, stunned. You've been doing this for a year. Sneaking around, lying to my face, meeting multiple men. Do they know about each other? She nodded, ashamed. They know. They don't care. They're okay with it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And me? Was I just some clueless fool in all of this? Did you even care about what this would do to me? I didn't mean for it to get this far, she said, sobbing. I was lonely, Liam. You were always so busy with your career, your followers. I felt invisible. Don't you dare try to blame this on me, I said, my voice shaking with rage. You didn't feel invisible. You felt entitled. You thought you could have it all without consequences. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't care. The image of her laughing with those men burned in my mind, fueling my anger. I'm done, I said finally, my voice cold and steady. I'm done being your backup plan while you live whatever twisted fantasy you've created. I'll be contacting a lawyer tomorrow. We're finished. Rebecca fell to her knees, begging me to reconsider, but I turned away. The love I had once felt for her was gone, replaced by a hollow emptiness I couldn't ignore. As I walked out of the house, her cries echoing behind me, I realized this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be messy, painful, and filled with challenges. But for the first time in months, I felt like I was reclaiming control of my life. I spent the night in a motel, staring at the cracked ceiling, my mind spinning. The betrayal, the lies, they consumed me. But amid the chaos in my head, one thought kept rising above the rest, Melissa. Melissa wasn't my biological child. Rebecca had her from her first marriage, long before we met. Her father, Daniel, had disappeared from their lives when Melissa was just a baby, leaving Rebecca to raise her alone. When Rebecca and I got married 5 years ago, Melissa was just a toddler, and I stepped into the role of her father. I taught her how to ride a bike, cheered her on at her school plays, and tucked her into bed every night. She'd never known anyone else as Dad. The thought of leaving Rebecca wasn't what broke me, it was leaving Melissa. She was 6 now, and her wide, innocent eyes looked up to me like I was her hero. How could I walk away from her? Would she understand? Or would she think I was just like the man who abandoned her before? The next morning, Rebecca left a note saying she was at a friend's place to give me space. I didn't care where she was, I needed to focus on Melissa. I couldn't let Rebecca's betrayal destroy the bond I'd built with the little girl who trusted me with her whole heart. By afternoon, I found myself parked outside her school. She didn't know I'd be there, but I needed to see her. When the bell rang, she bounded out of the doors, her pink backpack bouncing on her shoulders. When her eyes found me, she lit up, her face breaking into a smile that melted my resolve. "Daddy," she yelled, running into my arms. I hugged her tightly, the weight of everything I'd been holding in finally crashing down. For a moment, it didn't matter that Rebecca had shattered my trust. It didn't matter that my marriage was falling apart. All that mattered was the little girl in my arms who called me Dad. "Hey, kiddo," I said, my voice thick. "How was school?" "Good. Miss Taylor said I did the best drawing in class," she said proudly, showing me a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack. It was a family picture, me, her, and Rebecca, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. The sight of it nearly broke me. How could I tell her the family she had drawn was falling apart? How could I explain that the mother she adored had betrayed me in ways I couldn't forgive? "It's beautiful, Melissa," I said, forcing a smile. "You're a great artist." She beamed, tucking the picture away. "Can we get ice cream, Daddy?" please. How could I say no? For those few hours, I let myself forget everything else. We sat in a booth at her favorite ice cream shop, laughing over chocolate sundaes, just like we always did. But deep down, I knew things couldn't stay like this forever. That evening, when Rebecca came home, I was waiting for her. She looked exhausted, her face pale and drawn. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I didn't waste time. "This isn't about us. This is about Melissa." Rebecca froze, her eyes filling with tears. "Liam, I know I've hurt you, but please don't take it out on her. She loves you so much. Do you even hear yourself?" I shot back. "This isn't about me punishing her. This is about the fact that you've made a mess of our lives, and now I have to figure out how to protect her from it." Rebecca collapsed into a chair, sobbing. "I don't know what to say. I've made so many mistakes, but Melissa, she needs you, Liam. You've been the only stable thing in her life. Don't take that away from her." "I won't," I said firmly. "She's my daughter, Rebecca. You might have brought her into this world, but I'm the one who's been there for her. And I'm not walking away from that. But you and I, we're finished." Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't stay to comfort her. I couldn't. I packed a bag, kissed Melissa goodnight while she slept, and walked out the door. As I drove away, the weight of it all crushed me. My marriage was over, but Melissa wasn't just Rebecca's daughter. She was my daughter, too, in every way that mattered. And no matter how broken I felt, I knew one thing for sure, would fight for her. I'd fight to stay in her life, even if it meant going to war with Rebecca. For Melissa, I wouldn't let this betrayal define us. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. I stayed with a friend while trying to piece together what my future would look like. Every time I thought about Melissa, my heart ached. She didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this mess. No matter how angry I was at Rebecca, I couldn't let Melissa lose another father figure. But Rebecca wasn't making it easy. She texted and called constantly, alternating between apologizing and begging me to come back. When I didn't respond, she switched tactics, accusing me of abandoning Melissa. That hit a nerve. I hadn't abandoned her, I was fighting to figure out how to stay in her life despite everything. On the advice of my friend, I called a lawyer. His name was Patrick, a no-nonsense guy who got straight to the point. "If you want to stay in Melissa's life, you need to establish legal rights," he said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She's not your biological daughter, and you didn't formally adopt her. That means Rebecca has full legal custody. If she decides to shut you out, there's not much stopping her, unless we act now." The idea of Rebecca using Melissa as a pawn filled me with dread. "What do I need to do?" I asked. Patrick laid out a plan. We would file for a petition to establish parental rights based on my role as Melissa's de facto father. It wasn't going to be easy, courts tend to favor biological parents, but I had years of evidence showing I'd been her primary caregiver, from school pickups to doctor appointments. The paperwork was filed, but the waiting was excruciating. Rebecca wasn't pleased when she found out. "So now you're trying to take my daughter away from me," she spat during one of our rare face-to-face meetings. "I'm not taking her away from you," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside me. "I just want to make sure I don't lose her either." "You're punishing me," she snapped. "No, Rebecca. I'm protecting Melissa. You made this bed. Now you have to lie in it." The conversation ended with her slamming the door, but I didn't care. I wasn't backing down. Meanwhile, I made sure to spend as much time with Melissa as I could. Every weekend, I took her to the park, helped her with homework, and made her favorite pancakes on Sunday mornings. She didn't understand why I wasn't coming home at night, but she didn't ask. One night, while tucking her into bed, she looked up at me with those big green eyes. "Daddy, are you mad at Mommy?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I stroked her hair and forced a smile. No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups just need to figure things out. But no matter what, I'll always love you. Promise? She asked, holding out her pinky. I hooked mine around hers. Promise. The court hearing came faster than I expected. Rebecca showed up with her lawyer, and it was clear she was ready to fight. She painted a picture of me as unstable, someone who walked out on her and Melissa without a second thought. It was hard to sit there and listen to her twist the truth, but Patrick was prepared. He presented photo albums, school records, and testimony from friends and teachers who all said the same thing: I was Melissa's father in every way that mattered. Rebecca's lawyer argued that biology was what mattered, that Melissa already had a father who chose not to be in her life, and that I couldn't replace him. But then Patrick asked Rebecca a question that changed everything. Does Melissa know Liam isn't her biological father? Rebecca hesitated, glancing at her lawyer before admitting, no. She doesn't. And why is that? Patrick pressed. Rebecca fidgeted in her seat. Because she loves him. She sees him as her dad. Patrick nodded. Exactly. Because he is her dad. That's all we're asking the court to recognize. The judge took 2 days to make a decision, and those were the longest 2 days of my life. When the ruling finally came, I held my breath as the judge spoke. While Mr. Callahan is not Melissa's biological father, it is clear that he has acted as her parent in every way. It is in the best interest of the child that this relationship continues. I am granting joint custody. Relief flooded through me, and tears stung my eyes. I had done it. I had fought for Melissa, and I had won. Rebecca wouldn't even look at me as we left the courtroom, but I didn't care. This wasn't about her. This was about Melissa. That evening, when I picked her up from school, she ran into my arms like she always did. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Hey, kiddo, I said, hugging her tightly. Guess what? I get to be your daddy forever. She pulled back, confused but smiling. You already are, silly. I laughed, holding her close. You're right. And I always will be. Rebecca had always cared deeply about appearances. She thrived on being the confident, polished businesswoman with the picture-perfect life. Her friends admired her, her family adored her, and she relished the admiration. But now, I was done protecting her secrets. If she wanted a fight, I'd give her one, and I wouldn't lose. The first step in my plan was simple: tell the truth. Not just to Melissa, but to the people who had believed in Rebecca's facade. I wasn't vindictive by nature, but Rebecca had manipulated and betrayed me, all while acting like she was the victim. Her lies had torn apart our marriage, and I wouldn't let her manipulate the narrative any longer. I started with her family. Her parents had always been kind to me, and I thought they deserved to know the truth. I invited them to my apartment, sitting them down in the small living room where Melissa's toys were scattered across the floor. What's this about, Liam? Her mother, Diane, asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I hesitated, knowing what I was about to say would devastate them. I think you should know why Rebecca and I are separating, I began. Over the next hour, I laid everything bare: the affairs, the betrayal, the lies she told to keep me in the dark. I showed them the proof Steve had gathered: photos, texts, and even group chats with her lovers. Diane sat in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face. Her father, Robert, was stone-faced, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of the couch. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand why I'm fighting for Melissa, I finished. She's my daughter in every way that matters, and I won't let Rebecca's choices ruin her life. Diane sobbed into a tissue, shaking her head. We had no idea. How could she do this? Robert finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. She's brought shame on this family, on you, on Melissa. I can't believe I raised someone capable of this. They promised to support me in the custody battle, vowing to confront Rebecca about her behavior. That was only the beginning. Next, I turned to her friends. Many of them had been at our wedding, people who had congratulated us on what they thought was a perfect union. I wasn't looking for pity, I just wanted the truth to be out there. Using the same evidence I'd shown her parents, I sent a message to a group of mutual friends, explaining why I'd left Rebecca and why I was fighting for Melissa. The fallout was immediate. Rebecca's closest friends were horrified. Some reached out to me directly, apologizing for ever doubting me. Others distanced themselves from her entirely. The facade she had worked so hard to maintain was crumbling, and there was no way to stop it. Meanwhile, Melissa was my priority. I sat her down one evening, trying to find the right words to explain the changes in her life without overwhelming her. "Sweetheart," I began gently, "you know how much I love you, right?" She nodded, her green eyes wide. "I love you too, Daddy." "There are going to be some changes," I said, my voice tight. "Your mommy and we're not going to live together anymore. But that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. I'll always be here for you." "Is it because you and Mommy are mad at each other?" she asked, her voice small. I pulled her into my arms, my heart breaking for her. "It's not your fault, Melissa. None of this is your fault. Grown-ups make mistakes sometimes, and it's my job to make sure you're happy and safe." She nodded against my chest, and I kissed the top of her head. The final blow came when Rebecca's family and friends confronted her. Diane and Robert, furious over her behavior, demanded accountability. Her closest friends turned their backs on her, disgusted by the double life she'd been leading. Rebecca tried to save face, spinning excuses and half apologies, but it was too late. The custody hearing was swift and decisive. With the evidence I had provided and the character witnesses from Rebecca's own family and friends, the judge granted me primary custody of Melissa. Rebecca was given visitation rights, but only under strict supervision. When the ruling was announced, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Melissa would stay with me, where she belonged. That evening, as I tucked her into bed, she hugged me tightly. "I'm glad you're my daddy," she whispered. I kissed her forehead, my chest tight with emotion. "I'm glad too, kiddo." Rebecca's reputation never recovered. She lost friends, respect, and even professional connections. But none of that mattered to me. All I cared about was Melissa, and making sure she grew up surrounded by love, stability, and truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we could finally start rebuilding our lives. And this time, I'd make sure no one could tear us apart again. One afternoon, Melissa came home from school clutching a drawing she'd made in art class. "Look, Daddy," she said, beaming as she held it up for me to see. It was a picture of the two of us sitting under a tree, holding hands. Above us, she'd written in her careful, uneven handwriting, "My family." I swallowed hard, my chest tightening with emotion. "It's beautiful, kiddo," I said, pulling her into a hug. She looked up at me, her green eyes sparkling. "Do you like it?" "I love it," I said, my voice thick. "You're an amazing artist." Life wasn't perfect, it never is, but we were finding our way. Rebecca's supervised visits continued, and though I kept my distance, I noticed she was trying harder. Whether it was guilt, regret, or genuine love for Melissa, I didn't know, but she was making an effort to be present for her daughter. That was enough for now. As for me, I had started to rebuild my own life. My career as an influencer flourished, but I kept my personal life private, protecting Melissa from the kind of attention that could come with public scrutiny. On the weekends, we explored nearby parks, went to the movies, or stayed in making pancakes and watching cartoons. Each moment reminded me that happiness didn't come from perfection, it came from being present for the people you love. One evening, as I was tucking Melissa into bed, she surprised me with a question. "Daddy, are you happy?" I paused, taken aback. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" She shrugged, fiddling with the corner of her blanket. "You smile a lot, but sometimes you look sad when you think I'm not looking." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I sat down on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair back gently. "You know what? I am happy," I said, and it was true. "I'm happy because I get to be your dad. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." She smiled, her small hand reaching out to hold mine. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, kiddo. Always." As I left her room that night, I realized I wasn't just moving forward, I was building something better. Melissa and I weren't defined by Rebecca's mistakes or the pain of the past. We were a team, and together, we'd created a life filled with love, trust, and resilience. The scars from Rebecca's betrayal would always be there, but they didn't control me anymore. My focus was on the future, on being the best father I could be to the little girl who had given my life meaning. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. And that was enough.